Hey, good afternoon. This is Dr. Long at Colorado Tech for Management 821. Instead of reviewing the weekly readings, we're in our last week and you guys got that pretty much under control, I thought I would take this opportunity for the last live chat to go ahead and review some larger level topics, and I thought I'd share with you my dissertation defense format and some insights that came out of my research as a way maybe to give you a preview of coming attractions once you get into your own research. So I defended October 6, 2011 at CTU, and the title was A Critical Evaluation of Participatory Action Research and Curriculum Design. My committee was Dr. James, Dr. Thatchin-Carey, and Dr. Wall. The area I was interested in was that in 2008, when I started the program, I observed that students and faculty were frustrated by their educational experience at the Army's Command and General Staff College, and that we weren't living up to the standards of the Army vision for decentralized execution, centralized trust, and really letting people contribute to their own educational experience. And it was my contention that CGSE education should reflect the best of both doctrine and reflective practice, because these students that are here leave the college and then go lead the field army for 10 years. And I was studying how our logistics department, where I'm a curriculum developer, was trying to improve its educational practice along the lines that I just described. It was significant because we're a center of Army excellence for leadership education. It's courseware that's taught to every major in the Army, as well as hundreds of officers from the other services and then several hundred international officers. I think the research was significant because it looked at how we could incorporate stakeholder insights into all of these college processes that pertaining to curriculum, and it gave insights into how we as a college made decisions about how we teach decision making. And it explores a practitioner-centric model for professional education, and I think that the techniques and principles I worked on had applicability to other professional colleges, both in the military profession and outside the profession as well. So my specific research questions were threefold. First, I wanted to measure the effects of participatory action research generated curriculum on faculty and students. Second, I wanted to see how well this bottoms-up generated curriculum would satisfy the top-level Army educational outcomes. So Department of Army directs that certain educational outcomes are to be achieved at each of its schools, and we wanted to see how well the match between bottoms-up and top-down curriculum would be. And then I was interested in a personal level on my third question: how have my teaching and curriculum design practice been affected by PAR? So my general research framework was this: that there was a changing world, and that we had a set of traditional Army methods and traditional curriculum methods that were producing documents and processes. That the traditional Army methods were the top-down approach had generated new requirements to educate dynamic leaders along 9 skills and attributes were identified. That our traditional curriculum methods at the college were producing lectured classes tailored towards small groups, and that the opportunity for treatment was this idea of networked participatory action research. And so over the course of 2 years, I examined how that network PAR might actually generate new curriculum centered on experiential games and social media initially. And then I was also interested in seeing how participating in that network as the researcher and as a teacher would affect my practice as a teacher, as a student, and as a curriculum designer. So if we look at the 3 questions I had, the first question dealt with what was the effect of this network PAR on the development of curriculum? How did it differ from the traditional curriculum? Second one was, how did the focus on experiential games and social media that came from the bottoms up map to the requirements that were coming from top down? And the third question was, what were the effects on my own practice as a person. So the three methods that I was going to use were appreciative sharing of knowledge, for valencing in order to identify important areas for transformation, coding that was done throughout participatory action research to identify the major themes, and then critical narrative inquiry to examine the stories that were told by leaders and teachers and students to see what could be uncovered in the way that we told stories coming out of the David Bogie tradition. I use this chart here as a basic framework for my proposal defense. I supported my dissertation with a literature review that included things about methodologies and supporting theories. These were various theories that had an effect on the way I was conducting the research and the way I was interpreting it. And then descriptive theory that were affected by and informed my analyses and conclusion, the ideas of connectivism, bounded rationality, and chaos and complexity. I used a mixed method study to incorporate participatory action research as a top-level guide to the project. I used at various times appreciative sharing of knowledge to find strengths and generate energy for transformation. I used critical narrative inquiry to examine how we made organizational sense out of the data. I mixed qualitative and quantitative data from public domains records that documented the college's processes and outcomes that should read quantitative. And I applied connectivist learning theory as an open systems framework for developing strategy. Connectivism says that knowledge and education can be found in the connections between members of a network, and that when you make connections, new knowledge can be generated. So we wanted to explore what the effect of encouraging network learning would do. Following Bob Dick's action research choice points from 2003, I answered these 7 questions to decide that I was going to be data focused, that I was going to be more of a performing artist than a technician. I was going to be participating in it, that I was more interested in the action as opposed to the theory of research. I was following the general outline of participatory action research in my mentor's book. I was going to choose a middle way between researcher and participant, that I was going to employ existing instruments and data mine text records of process and commentary rather than inventing a new research instrument, that I was looking for relevance rather than rigor, and that I would write up findings in the traditional approach in order to appeal to a wider audience. So you can see where I fall out on the practitioner versus theoretical spectrum. I felt like when I started the program, I was 75% post-positivist, about 5% constructionist and advocate, and about 15% pragmatist based on Creswell's researcher's worldview. I felt like at the end of this I had become very much a pragmatist, and then about equally balanced, acknowledging advocacy, post-positivism, and social constructionism. The last two, or these two, social constructionist and advocate, becoming much more respectable in my worldview as a result of going through the research. So that's a matter of about 3.5 years of self-work that was documented in question number 3, which was how did my practice as a teacher, student, and curriculum developer, and as a whole person, changed by the research. I'm not going to go through the individual components of this, but for each one of the questions, I took the top 10 findings and offered some evidence at the top level that I wanted to highlight for the committee and for the attendees. So in question 1, I was looking at insights that came about comparing traditional curriculum to that was generated from the bottoms up by faculty and students. In question 2, I did an extensive text database comparison between top-level documents that came out of Department of the Army and about 5,000 or 6,000 blog postings and essays written by students and faculty over a couple years, identifying what they thought were the important components of education. Then I looked for the areas of overlap in Area A, then things that DA said that the students didn't say in B, and then things that students said but which Department of the Army hadn't said. So there were some cases where there was convergence in Area A, but then some important differences between how Department of the Army on the left came out on these what I call diverging spectrum of insight. So it was quite an interesting and extensive narrative inquiry. And then I identified 5 top findings for question 3, and then 2. And then in question 3, I examined, going through my reflective learning journal over 3 years, and in the essays that I wrote monthly, quarterly, and annually to my mentor, the importance of top 10 things that I learned about myself by going through, and then tying that back to the evidence of my learning journal. I then pulled together 6 top meta themes that involved insights from all 3 of the research questions, and I spent some time talking about what I consider to be an important meta finding, which was the concept of voice, and that is giving people a voice in their own education and in planning their own lives and executing their own lives. And so I couldn't come with any conclusions other than that it's important to ask these sets of questions if you propose to encourage democracy or encourage powering down, and we should at least have answers or discussion points about each of these questions. Too numerous to talk about here, but an important part of my findings. The limitations of the research are straightforward. You're going to be careful about overgeneralizing, but the insights were offered broadly to the world through my own blogs and papers and subsequent work, where I'm seeking actively to make connections to other educators and leaders in various disciplines to see what we can learn out of our intersection. I then had a series of background discussion slides that we spent a little bit of time in, which I had shared with my committee members as I went through the 3 years of the research. This one was important. It talked about how participatory action research was a balance of practice and theory, and that I was conducting cycles of participatory action research and then using narrative inquiry to help make sense out of the many different projects that spun out of each of those cycles. That Army force management, change management and force generation was an important starting point for this transformation in curriculum, and I noted theories that were emerging that helped me interpret what was going on and to keep going forward. I found that in action research that these 4 ways of knowing were really important ways to look at all of the things going on in a learning organization when you're trying to make changes for the better. I talked about the composition of my committee and why I picked the ones that I did so that I would get a good triangulation from 3 different diverse backgrounds and personal methodologies. I talked about the way I mixed methods in here, and then the way I was going from military practice into military education at the college, and the use of feedback instruments to create adaptive curriculum, and how we interpreted that at the leader level, the teacher level, the designer level, and the student level in an ongoing way. I talked about this environment of dynamically networked stakeholders and forces. What ended up happening, and you'll see in the next slide, is that a few initial projects began to spin off connections to other types of transformations that were inspired by the results of the early rounds, and then I was committed to letting them go and develop and flower. And what ended up happening was we had various members at various distances to the central ideas of participatory action research and curriculum who were drawn in on various projects and then maybe moved out if they weren't interested in the next round. And it went all the way from individuals in my office all the way out to the Army and international school peers and scholars from different disciplines, and that the worlds of theory and practice could be found. The ideas of how goals and directives crossed all of these different boundaries and scopes, the ideas of forming allies and partnerships, and then the effect of resources and law upon the nature of the types of programs that we were developing. What this one shows is that participatory action research follows the 4 general steps that you know, and participatory action research is a particular brand of action research that emphasizes the ongoing contributions of people inside the program, acting as full researchers and having choice over the direction of future cycles, whereas in some forms of action research they are more guided. I found appreciative inquiry became an important component of many of the cycles of action research because of its demonstrated power to affect positive change. And so what this little network diagram I'm trying to show is that what started off as a couple individual projects in a participatory action cycle, as you can see here, then started generating series of branching and sequels where the scope of the action research began to grow much wider, much like the way flowers or plants will propagate, and that at various times these individual projects were either action research cycles or appreciative inquiry cycles. They could have been a quantitative cycle where I was examining data records for specific results that would then feed forward into the network to the next project, and then sets of sense-making cycles where key stakeholders would come together to make sense out of the data that had been generated by the action research cycles. And so what started off as a few ideas ended up growing to be over 150 different separate projects that were all linked together by these common themes and values in the original steering committee of the action research. And so I saw this mixed methods really as the intersection between action research, the positive aspects of appreciative inquiry and appreciative sharing of knowledge, and the critical sense making that came out of narrative inquiry in order to try to bring a little bit of structured critical thinking and multiple perspectives to the sense making and the findings that were coming out of each of these individual projects. I felt it was necessary to ground the research findings in some alternative interpretations and not just take at face value the insights that came out of the fishbowl. I wanted the narrative inquiry's critical components to help me. So that's what I've tried to array here, is how this participatory action research really unfolded as a result of allowing the process to go where it wanted to and letting people run with the ball. At various times I tried to pull together into these mind maps an artist's rendition of how this divergent thinking in PAR became convergent thinking through the process of sense making, and I framed that inside the various points of leadership inside the college, so that we were involving elements of and artifacts from the school, which is the storehouse of doctrine, which was responding to doctrine that emerged from the world. We saw how the world could generate personal formative events that would affect Army leaders, and how they would make decisions about how to inform our qualitative leadership models that were taught at the school to students by faculty, but the faculty experience as well had some effect on how things were going to be taught. And these were to students who would go out and serve in various units in the world, from which new requirements about qualitative leadership judgment would be communicated back into models, back to Army leaders, back to the schoolhouse. And so it was this really blending of time and experience by multiple stakeholder groups that were helping us understand the world as it currently is, and then trying to project future needs so we could get that reflected back into the educational program in time to make a difference. What I found was that each participatory action research cycle involved both elements of theory and then evidence generated by those cycles, so a blend of theory and experience that would drive forward to each new successive PAR cycle. And so that as I went along, I was discovering that I needed new pieces of theory to add to the mix, that I was not able to anticipate all of those theories ahead of time. And so this was very much a growing, evolving research project. So as I note here, as the problem morphs, expands, travel, the number of theories expand. And then as you increase the number of theories, your ability to go deep on each one of them decreases because of the time and space and resource limitations of humans. And so you have to make deliberate decisions to trade off between theory and practice, and staying true to the possibility of where PAR wants to go. You have to give up the idea that you can map that all out ahead of time and then just sample certain things. And that goes back to those choice points that Bob Dick makes, and that is, are you looking for relevance or for rigor? Are you looking for data, or are you looking for theory? Are you looking for results rather than theory? So I was true to the original intent, which was to be willing to go where the data and the people and the stakeholders and the decisions would take me, and I was doing my best to document the strategies and the decisions and the experience of it, perhaps at the expense of having a preordained theoretical model that would guide everything from the beginning, where I could, have a sterile hypothesis that I would then try to approve or disprove. So just recognize that those are trade-offs that you make, that there is a finite amount of energy, time, and attention and opportunity that you can bring to it. And you got to decide if you want to go broad or deep, or a combination of both. And you can expect to have to revisit that quite often. And so I come back to my research framework, which said really I wanted to really explore the difference between bottoms-up curriculum and that driven by top-down, and what was it like to go through those projects from the inside and document the choices that were made, and to see what we could learn about students who were willing to take on responsibility for the design of their own education, as well as faculty asked to take on a greater role for what goes on in the classroom. I did an extensive comparison of the top-down versus the bottom-up requirements generation process, comparing what DA said to the students at large areas of overlap but some interesting differences. And then I spent a lot of the analysis on going through how I observed myself changing as a person, as a student, as a teacher, as a professional, as a consequence of allowing participatory action research to guide me. It really had some revolutionary changes on who I am and how I go about my work. So that's the dissertation defense went much deeper than I could cover here, because really my committee members had been following along with me, and so they'd had a chance to read some of the details, and so we spent about a good 2.5 hours, maybe 3 hours, going through findings and back and forth discussions, and I was really appreciative of how much they treated me like a peer, giving me a chance to talk about my findings as an equal. And I had done, I guess, all the heavy lifting in the development of the research and the writing and the papers and the answering their detailed questions, and so the defense ended up being much more of a celebration of the completion of a journey, as opposed to trying to make final proofs about the journey. But that was the work that had been done all along the way, going with extensive communication back and forth. And so I just wanted to share those insights with you, and give you just one person's perspective on how this stuff can come together for you at the end of the road. And then you end up realizing that's just the first waypoint on the rest of your career, in which you get to apply those insights now and do some good in the world. So thanks for your kind attention, and I'll talk about this more tonight on the chat room.